Hello everyone, this is Bethlehem, Attfield. Welcome to the podcast Journey to Ethiopia with a Story. Identity, Politics and Introspection. What do you do when society and the dominant culture manage to undermine your self-perception? Like me, you may unknowingly find yourself stumbling into politics or turn into introspection and end up expressing your feelings in poetry. What do you call yourself these days? If the Creator asks, marveling at the audacity of humans, or claims that one race is superior to all others, I would answer, I'm a woman, of course. What kind of a woman are you? What is your desire? I'm a woman of faith and a woman of color. I'm Black, British by citizen, Ethiopian by birth, a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother, and a good neighbor. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. My life is a tapestry marvelously woven. Lest anyone thinks or says otherwise, my faith and knowledge keeps me grounded. My children are neither white nor black. Their globetrotters never lived in their motherland. In a world where identity is elusive, where injustice reigns, what can I bequeath them but hope and faith? I believe humanity will soon rise above racial bias, with regular reflection to overcome prejudice. A desire for all to attain dignity, justice, and respect, and for peace to reign on blessed earth. I first experienced blatant racism when I moved from London to Southeast Asia. Vietnamese people seem to carry their history of victory over the Chinese, French, and more recently America with dignity. These costly wars over the generation seem to have left a legacy of resilience. The country's economic growth had been amongst the highest since year 2000. If you had lived in Vietnam between 2001 and 2006, as I did, you could literally see the dramatic economic transformation with your own eyes. I found Hanoi a vibrant, fast-paced and industrious city. People never seemed to sleep. Traffic appeared chaotic, swarms of motorcycles weaving in and out of orderly lanes. As I gazed at this spectacle, people in turn stared at me with surprise. Although Vietnamese people must have seen Black American soldiers during the war, 30 years down the line, seeing a Black woman walking on the streets of Hanoi was still a spectacle. It is not so unusual for people in a community to stare at someone who looks different, if only it had stopped there. But unfortunately for me, I made the effort of learning the local language. In the marketplace, I would be bartering in Vietnamese, and the vendor would talk back in Vietnamese, and without batting an eye, would also wonder out loud, "Ôi giời ơi, xấu quá, đen quá," meaning, "Oh my God, too ugly or too black." I looked at the vendor incredulously, expecting an apology. But of course, she wouldn't have it any other way because she didn't give a damn. Why should she? My feelings did not matter. I decided to dig deeper to see if these remarks, which seemingly sound like hate speech, were maliciously uttered to hurt me. Poorer folks who work on the rice fields are quite dark. So are the large community of people living in floating villages. So dark skin was associated with marginalized community. Most Vietnamese women obsessively loathed getting suntanned. It was common to see women in their motor bicycles wearing 1930s-style long gloves. They also preferred to wear protective sun hats rather than helmets, although the rate of death from head injury was phenomenal. When I walked in upmarket boutiques, the salesperson would follow me around with suspicion. As dark people are associated with being poor, they assumed that I might be there to shoplift. I joined the International Women's Club, through which I met a couple of other black women. When I shared my shopping experiences, they agreed that they went through similar experiences every day. Nowhere in the world would I have formed friendships solely based on color of skin, but the racial situations in Hanoi called for desperate measures. So I joined a pre-existing black group of friends who came from various countries around the world: Costa Rica, Guyana, Ghana, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Nigeria, South Africa, Madagascar, the UK, and the USA. Some of us were accompanying spouses in interracial marriages, so our husbands did not identify with these racial issues. So it was good to turn to friends who knew how it felt to be repeatedly ridiculed and slighted. They precisely knew how it could mess with one's self-esteem. It started as more of a supportive, affirming group, but now, looking back, it was also a form of identity politics. This is when social groups are formed based on the shared experiences of injustice and discrimination of their members. Critics of identity politics counter that basing politics on marginalized groups may fracture the civil polity. We, however, chose to recognize that the people who were hurling insulting remarks were not consciously being racists. They were just insensitively expressing their simplistic, ignorant views. So instead of being bruised by these racial abuses and isolating ourselves, we chose to rise above it. Surprisingly, racism was not a factor I had to grapple with during my first move from my country of origin, Ethiopia, to the UK. As a young Ethiopian woman in higher education, I found the plethora of cosmopolitan opportunities dazzling. So I was simply too busy to notice inhibiting factors related to race. Initially, my Ethiopian accent made me feel less confident to access public services. I felt British people, white and black alike, were less patient and more dismissive when they heard my accent. I didn't for a minute associate this to racism, but rather to bias against the African continent or migration in general. Most people could not consider that I could be an overseas tuition-paying university student because of the stereotype that views all young African people as asylum-seeking migrants. Over 20 years on, as the Black Lives Matter movement gathers international momentum, I start to question my previous views. My children are now preparing to enroll at UK universities. As we research which one to go for, all university websites proudly proclaim how they encourage diversity and commit to racial equality. However, non-white students and academics tell a different story. The reason most white people do not think they are racist is because they perceive racism as individual acts of intentional malice directed at certain races. However, structural racism takes into account the system that shapes white people to think and behave the way they do. Western democratic systems propagate that everyone's destiny is in their own control and choice, regardless of their socio-economic, racial, cultural circumstances. Such liberal views are skewed because of the assumption that everybody begins from the same starting line, when in actual fact, some have many more advantages than others. A research carried out by Katie Sean, a lecturer at University of York, found out that structural liberal racism is the most dominant form of racism practiced at universities. Based on in-depth interviews with various faculty members from Russell Group universities, she concluded that structural racism commonly manifests in the form of microaggressions. These are brief slides or actions that people use to make others feel bad about themselves. According to one respondent,
people in the academia are a bit smarter. They're more subtle and they understand what they can't say. Everything is a bit more institutionalized. But you get the sense that it's also the place where things are unchecked. I think in general, people try to be nice and they want to be nice, but they have all these ingrained biases.
Another respondent similarly expressed, the problem with day-to-day encounters of racism is that it's difficult to pinpoint them down. I've felt that haven't been included a number of times, or I'm the last person to be consulted on something. Sometimes it's just so damn subtle. It is in the gestures, it's what's not said. The researcher clarifies the illusion that the UK no longer has racial problems is exactly how racism is sustained. The denial of the existence of racism, as in it's banned so de facto it does not exist, is a dominant belief within universities. While this in one hand obscures the daily realities of non-whites, on the other hand hinders white students and staff from considering themselves as perpetrators of racism. Another respondent explained how he was challenged by a biased student.
A white male undergraduate student challenged me on a series of issues when I explained the topic of political violence. He started to ask questions and make points that were Islamophobic. He was talking about child molestation by the Prophet Muhammad, how Islam had been a religion spread by the sword, how Muslims believed in female genital mutilation, and so on. I was constantly having to explain and defend the religion of over 1 billion people because somehow in the eyes of the student, I was Islam. So I found that to be a really uncomfortable experience.
Unlike my dismissive attitude towards structural racism during my student days, many students in the Black, Asian, minority ethnic demographics are now sharply aware of pervasive discrimination that's sustained within UK institutions. That's why they protest, demanding that discussions about race take place at various levels. Only then will meaningful changes start to happen. Thus, my children's introspections goes like this.
Being biracial is like a cup half full but also half empty. We have privilege but are not entitled fully. We may be second generation, tainted by westernization, but we know we urgently need justice, not lip devotion. Raised in international expat community, third culture kids, rounded but also perhaps blinded to what it was like being black in the West that exploits the races, mixing hatred with embraces, of entrenched obstacles made normal in societies that claim to be havens. Isn't it ironic how many seeking freedom and idolize them, only to end in more shackles and mayhem? People of myriad colors gather with solidarity to empower and to stop this institutional brutality. Ye are many, they are few. Placard proudly brandishing, we join the marches. We may be new to this cause, but we will fight regardless.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to listen to more stories as soon as they are released, please subscribe to this channel. Until the next story, goodbye.